Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back to Della's Voice. I have once again the beautiful Carlayne Gilbertson,
Oh, thank you.
performance coach, my coach, on the show today, and we're going to talk about the topic of vulnerability and how important it is in being authentic and living an authentic life.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome back, Carlayne.
Thanks,
My
Della.
angel.
Oh, I love when you call me that. You know, I have a thing for angels. So when you started calling me angel, I was like, oh, you have my heart.
Well, it's true. You are my angel.
Aw.
And so thank you for agreeing to come back on the show.
Of course.
And I know this is one of your favorite topics.
Yes, absolutely. I love
One that
this topic.
you like to talk about this a lot, and me too. So let's start. For the audience, can you, in simple words, just explain what your definition of vulnerability is?
Right. So vulnerability is one of those things that in the past has kind of gotten a little bit of a bad rap, meaning that a lot of people associate vulnerability to being weak or weakness. In the business world, sometimes when it comes to technology and different things, they call it vulnerability as a negative thing, right? We're vulnerable here. So vulnerability does have that definition, meaning that you are in danger, unsafe, not protected. Okay, but vulnerability when it comes to human beings, really what it's about is it's being raw, it's being authentic, it's being honest, it's being your true self. It's about showing up and being fully seen. Most of us have been trained to create a mask. Brene Brown calls it an armor, and I love that. And it's really about how we show up in the world. So we have two selves. We have our ideal self up here, and we have a perceived self. And the perceived self is who we think the world sees us as. The ideal self is that one who we always say, oh my goodness, I should start a business and I can do this, this, and this. And then we kind of come back down here. If our self-concept is broken, we kind of come back to this perceived self and say, oh, never mind, I can't do that. But we wear masks out into the world. So vulnerability is really just the ability to really be seen, to be brave enough to just own who you are, express and show your faults, your flaws, your innermost feelings. Really, that's vulnerability. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking, as children, we have no problem being vulnerable.
So true.
Right?
So true.
So what do you think? Up to what age do we live that that life without wearing masks? And then at what age do we start wearing them?
Yeah, I think it's probably around the age, I think they've identified the age around 6 as kind of being the transition period. I know that I have 4 children, so in watching my kids and how they kind of shifted into that, where they realized, so when they're little, they are so vulnerable. They just own everything. They just cry in the middle of the grocery store. It doesn't matter, right? They have no care in being vulnerable and showing how they're feeling and their emotions. My daughter was a performer. When anyone came over to the house, she would put on these glasses without lenses, and she'd put on music, and she'd do a dance for them. Like, no problem. She was just right up there. But then around that age time frame, what happens is we start to realize that we have this perception in the world, right? That people actually see us a way that they could potentially be judging us. Right? Mm-hmm. So in our emotional world, we have our emotions are automatic responses from our brain. It's all about safety, but it's for 2 reasons. We either have an emotional response out of danger, like so physical danger, or we have an emotional response out of emotional danger. And emotional danger is perception of disconnection, judgment, non-acceptance, any of those things. Okay, so that's where that starts to begin, where they start to have an emotional response to this, and all of a sudden they feel this fear, and it creates this insecurity. Now, that age, give or take, right? Because it really depends on the home that they're growing up into.
Yes, yes.
right? It
I was
depends on
going to
that.
say the environment has a lot to do
Yes.
with how we develop. So I just want to ask you a question. Last time we spoke about self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come in?
Mm-hmm. To vulnerability.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, vulnerability is actually the key to a lot of that. So without vulnerability, we have to have self-belief in order to be vulnerable. So in order for us to build authentic connection. So this is the thing that's really ironic about vulnerability is most people fear vulnerability because in their mind, it means disconnection. But vulnerability is the key to real authentic connection. Okay. So it's actually this very skewed limiting belief that most of us have, feeling unsafe. But if we're not willing to be fully seen and show up, we can't have a true authentic connection, because then we can't share our feelings and we can't have someone else connect with us to say, yeah, me too. I go through that too. Because there's nothing more powerful than when two people can connect on the same thing. You know, when someone who gets it, when you really, you know, those conversations you have with someone and you might be sharing something very intimate and they just get it and you just feel so heard. You feel worthy. You feel important. You feel listened to. You feel like you matter in those conversations, but only that can happen through vulnerability. Now, the catch on that is that vulnerability builds self-worth. The more vulnerable we are, the more worthy we feel. However, we have to have a level of self-worth and self-belief in order to actually put ourselves out there and be vulnerable in the beginning, right? So it's kind of like that self-worth or self-belief equals vulnerability equals true authentic connections. Yeah.
It's so true. So I think back at every time I've spoken in front of a crowd and shared my own personal journey and story, and the more authentic I came out, the more vulnerable I was, the more I was honest about the way I felt and told my story.
Yes.
The more connected I felt with the people.
Absolutely.
And they also came to me afterwards and they also said the same thing, that you know, thank you for being so genuine, because you are real. That's usually the general consensus, that I was real.
Yeah. And real is so important. In order for us to connect with people, we are all attracted to that realness in people. When someone walks into a room and they own who they are and they're really authentic and they're really vulnerable and they just kind of go, yeah, oh yeah, I messed up. I blah, blah. You know, we're like, oh, who is that person? That's part of my tribe. I like them. I want to hang out with them. There's a connection to that because we all really deeply want that. And a lot of the times we're attracted to qualities in others that we may not have ourselves, or that we also share. But in order for us to really connect to another human being, we do have to be able to own who we are and show up in that vulnerable space. And it's important in all different areas. It's important for business as well. If you think about it, we're really in a place in the world right now with an increasing amount of thought leaders, entrepreneurs, people who are kind of running their own show and wanting to put their message out there, right? Having a different perspective and standing up and speaking up about what they believe. We need that authenticity and that vulnerability more than ever. And we're craving it. We want to do business with people who are real. You know, they have to, they've got to have the skills. You know, we've got to have the quality there for sure. But I'm going to work with someone who is real and vulnerable way before I work with anyone who is just really professional, you know? So there's a real connection, because at the end of the day, we're all humans, business or not. We want to connect with other humans. It's actually our deepest desire. It's the most important need collectively we have as human beings, is to connect. Yeah.
So if someone is new to this concept of vulnerability, how do they gauge themselves? Like, you know, is there a scale? Like, do I look at the scale and say, am I being authentic? Am I putting my vulnerable self out there enough times.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we get there?
Yeah, it's a process, right? So as you know, mental skills and building those mental skills takes time, just like, and I think we mentioned this in the last call, just like going to the gym and working out a muscle. You can't go once a week, and build the muscle. And your mental skills are no different. You're building, the muscle up here. So you need to practice it consistently. Now, in order to get to a place where if we talk about vulnerability with someone who is really struggling with unworthiness and an unworthiness pattern and limiting beliefs, they're probably not going to be able to get there. We have to start with emotions, and we have to start by really understanding ourselves. We have to start with self-awareness always, because we have to know ourselves in order for us to show up and be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, otherwise you don't even know who you are, right? You're showing up as like, you're still wearing a mask. You're still trying to now in that scenario, vulnerability could be, I don't know who I am. I'm lost. I'm stuck.
That's it. Yeah. Cause you can start right there.
Exactly. And that's the place that you can start, is really just kind of admitting, I don't have all the answers, or I'm really struggling in this area and I need help. Saying, and a lot of times now, especially for, parents who are struggling on their own, and there's a lot of expectations, I think, specifically of women, but I think men struggle with them too. There's single parents all over the world, men or women, but we have this pressure that we feel we need to do everything. And, we have to have a Pinterest home, and we have to raise good kids, and our kids all have to be in the proper activities, and we have to be in good shape and looking our best, and we have to run our businesses, and our home needs to be clean. And, there's like a lot of really high expectations that I think a lot of people have bought into. And they've attached a lot of their worthiness to trying to keep that facade up. And that's where there's a lack of vulnerability out in the world. It's that whole keeping up with the Joneses. Don't let them see you sweat. Wear the armor. Pretend you have it all together. But I guarantee you that the majority of those people walk through the door and they collapse, because wearing that mask, putting the mask on every day, putting that heavy armor on every day.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
So tiring. It really is. Yeah. I know, because I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I lived that life. I know what it felt like to put on the mask and the armor every day, and how free you feel when you finally just release it.
Yes.
You're light. You're so much lighter.
Yes.
But part of that is that process. But self-awareness is key. The other thing is that you can't have emotional intelligence is really imperative when it comes to vulnerability, because we need to be able to understand our emotions. We need to be able to understand when we have false beliefs that are coming up. We need to be able to manage those emotions. We need to be able to communicate those with people closest to us, because there's, based on our conditioned reactive behaviors of how we show up in maybe conflict situations, we need to be able to, in those moments where maybe we don't have control and we respond, react, that's what our brain is doing out of fear, fight, flight, or freeze, depending on what your method of choice is, your brain's method of choice. We need to be able to then say, you know what? I screwed up. I'm sorry. I was, when you said that to me, I was in a really threatening space. My self-worth was being questioned. I apologize. It had nothing to do with you. I shouldn't have reacted that way. We need to be able to express that and own that. That's part of being vulnerable as well. It's admitting, right?
Absolutely. So one of the best things I did, that I learned when talking to my son, who's now 17, when he was a teenager, we got into a few conflicts, and I used to react differently. But when I learned about vulnerability and how important it was and how powerful it was, I learned to say to him, well, listen, Dylan, I've never done this before. I'm learning as I go along.
Yes.
So when I said that, first of all, it was very freeing.
Yes.
And at the same time, it gave him the opportunity to say, yeah, like, you're right, you have never done this, so yeah, let's learn together. So that was really a
Beautiful.
good lesson for me.
What a beautiful moment. And you know, in those moments, you can see when you create a space like that, when you show up and you're vulnerable for another human being, you can see their state completely shift.
Mm-hmm.
When you do that, you watch them open to
Yeah.
you. Watch them. And I would challenge everybody who's watching to do that, is pick a vulnerable moment, an opportunity to kind of show up and be vulnerable, and just
Mm-hmm.
practice it in that moment. Just wing it out and watch how that other person responds.
Mm-hmm.
Be really aware and notice the results, because it really is a superpower.
Being vulnerable.
Yes.
Being able to, yeah, absolutely, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Because if you think about it, if everything is about connection, if everything is about acceptance and belonging, and we in one film moment can look at someone and hold their hand or whatever, be compassionate in that moment. And it doesn't even have to be pain. It can be even in business, getting curious, being really present with someone, and really kind of just opening yourself up for them. You can see them shift.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing that any of us want more than to be heard. You know what it feels like when someone's truly listening to you, how you just feel like, oh,
Yeah.
suddenly we have that sense of feeling important, feeling like we matter. What
Of
I'm
course.
saying matters. Yeah.
Yes.
But I don't think a lot of people practice that on a regular basis.
Mm.
Right?
You mean listening?
Yeah.
You mean listening? Well, active listening.
Active listening. Listening is part of being vulnerable, but it's how you're showing up. It's what you're sharing in those moments as well. It's how you respond to them.
Mm-hmm.
That is all part of being vulnerable, because if we're not being vulnerable, we're reacting. We're going into our own fear space and we're reacting. That's where that emotional intelligence comes into play. And I always say emotional intelligence is a superpower, because
Mm-hmm.
when you can understand yourself fully and your behaviors and why you showed up, you can own them, but you can also see it in other people. Whereas, you know, you can not take something personally because you can understand that, oh, that's about that person. How they're emotionally responding is about them. It's not about me. You know, so that all comes into play with vulnerability. When we're vulnerable, it eliminates loneliness because we make true connections. Do you know how many clients I have that say they struggle, their roadblock is vulnerability, and they almost all say to me, I never felt like I fit in. They created that. It's a false belief that they've created, saying I don't fit in, so therefore I don't open up. But if we don't open up, we're keeping ourselves at a distance from creating real bonds with people. Yeah.
And so that's a big part of it, opening up as a first step, because once you open up, you allow other people now to come into your world. And I was going to say, like, being vulnerable, it might seem hard at first because we're not used to it, but when you have a group of people that you really love and trust, you can start there. I mean,
well, yeah,
right, you can start practicing there.
Yeah, and that's another thing that Brene Brown says is that not everybody's earned the right to hear your story. So you don't want to be practicing this with just anyone. You want to be practicing this with the people that you love. And absolutely, just by showing up and just doing baby steps. Everything's baby steps. But you have to remember that we have to be focusing on the outcome of why we're doing it. We have to be focusing on the feelings that we want. If we want more truly connected relationships in our life, we have to really identify, what would that feel like if I had that? How would my relationships improve if I had that? We have to actually visualize what that looks like and feels like for us. And then what will happen is that gives us a little bit of that, motivation. Motivation is an emotion. So we need a little bit of that emotional motivation to push us past that comfort zone of going blah and saying something vulnerable to someone. Because our brain is very much associating danger with vulnerability.
Yes.
It's not scary at all. It's actually amazing and beautiful and freeing, and you can own everything in it. It frees you in such a way. But our brains tell us it's scary. And so it's just a block.
Because what would they think of me, right?
Well, right. Because if I'm vulnerable and if I say this stuff, they might judge me.
Yeah.
They might not like me.
Yeah.
They may not accept me. And then if they don't like me and they don't accept me, then I'm not worthy. That's what it comes down to. It's that need for self-worth. It's like air, and we have to have it. And so again, connection being the most important thing, but the very thing that our brain is associating that fear to, first of all, it comes from experience. It's probably because we weren't nurtured as a child. There was probably times in our life where maybe we were vulnerable. As I said, we come from that, generation of parents who weren't as emotionally kind of aware, right? And they didn't express emotions. Things were shoved into the carpet. That's the generation.
Yeah.
So we were often told we were too emotional. I'll give you something to cry about, all of those things. So when we
suck it up, buttercup.
Right. So when we expressed ourselves vulnerably, we were like belittled for it.
Yeah.
So we learned over time that that's weakness. And so we built up the armor to be strong because we didn't want our parents to, judge us or be angry at us, because really kids, all we want is our parents to accept us and be happy with us. So we morph into whatever it is we feel we need to be for that. So yeah, I mean, that's really what ends up happening. So we associate this fear with vulnerability. And like I said in the beginning, there's a contradiction, because we say, oh no, I need to have connection, so I can't do vulnerable. But the only way to do true connection is vulnerable. So it's misinformation that we've been programmed in our mind.
Well, that's the thing. And I mean, let's just imagine a person that you are talking to, or they're talking to you, and you feel like they're not being themselves, that they're fake, like you said, they have a facade. How connected do you feel to that person?
You don't.
You don't, right? You don't. So it's impossible to feel real connections unless you show up as your true self, and that takes vulnerability.
It does. And you've got to believe in yourself in order to do that. You've got to have self-acceptance. You've got to understand that even your faults, your flaws are there for a reason, right? That there's a reason why you have struggled in that area, or there's a reason why that behavior. We have to be able to make a link to why we've shown up that way. We have to be able to have compassion first with ourselves in order to be vulnerable. And then when we're vulnerable, that increases compassion as well for ourselves and for others, So it really opens up a lot of things to be able to do that. But you're absolutely right. We need to have that. And we won't connect with people who aren't open. No. Because when people aren't open, they also can make us feel judged. And so, for example, I know as a parent, parents struggle a lot with their kids. So at any given time, we could be having kids going through issues, teenagers, little ones, whatever, right? All different issues. So say you're with a group of women and you bring up, oh my gosh, my son, blah, blah, blah. We go on something, and the moms are looking at you kind of going, oh, well, I don't have that problem. Or I've never heard of that. Whoa, that sounds like there's something wrong. All of a sudden you are vulnerable and you got judged for being vulnerable, right?
Yes.
So that's where it's like, you've got to be in the right place. You've got to understand that anyone who isn't, if you show up vulnerably and that person doesn't meet you vulnerably, that's their vulnerability block. It's not your ability, because I call BS on that too. Because as a parent, we know parenting is not easy. It's the hardest job in the world, and that we've all gone through times where we're like, oh, I'm out, I'm done, right?
Yes.
So for a parent to be able to say that to another parent, it feels very judgmental, because it is one of those things that we want a parent who's going to go, oh my gosh, me too. I totally get that, and share stories and be able to connect on that level, because then you walk away from that going, oh, it's a little bit of therapy. It's parental therapy, right?
Yeah. That me too is such a true connection, right? Just two simple words, and
Totally.
you really don't need anything else. Like, but me too.
Absolutely.
That it's like a bond right away, right?
It really is. It's so powerful. It's
Yeah,
so powerful. Me too. I feel like that sometimes too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is what I want to reiterate. I think every time we talk, I always want to say this. It is not easy to do this work on your own.
That's right.
It's so much easier to have someone coaching you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because A, we don't know what we don't know.
That's right.
Right? And B, we always need that push. We need someone to keep us accountable.
That's
and
right.
So that's where you come in.
Yeah, and to educate, right? To understand, because sometimes we can, even if I was to say, give someone one of my tools and say, hey, here you go, take that tool, use it. They're like, well, I don't know what all this means now that it came up, right?
Yeah.
So you need help in processing that, and that's what I am, the mirror. I think I said that last time too. It's like, I'm just the mirror for you, so that you can actually see. If otherwise you don't have a mirror in front of you and you're trying to like see what's happening here, I can't see myself. So that's the purpose of that. But yeah, absolutely. I always think that that's the best result, is to always have somebody else, because in our own subjective experience, we can't see our own blocks. We just can't. We put on those lenses. That's the way we see the world. That's just the way it is.
That's it.
So we all need that. I need that too. Everybody does. So yeah.
So and you know, sometimes I meet people who might say to me, I'm stuck, I don't know what I'm doing, you know, like I need help, but they don't even know what they need help with. That's how stuck we get sometimes.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So from my own experience, I think when I called you, I was totally broken. I was in a space where I had no idea what, something was not working. Nothing was working, but I couldn't put my finger on it. And so when I called you, I was like, okay, what is she gonna do? Like, she doesn't even know me. But I swear, people, like this woman got it all out of me, and it wasn't long before everything was making sense, and it was more clear, and I got a newfound motivation for just to live. I found my purpose. I found my passion. I found out about being vulnerable and putting myself out there and not being afraid, and just going for it. So like, I'm living proof. You know, the reason why I talk about this so much, Carlayne, is because I feel like you as a performance coach and all these life coaches who are so trained to get people to live their best lives. This is your superpower. Yes. And so I want to make sure that people know about this, because this idea of life coach, it is pretty new, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair getting to a point where it's just widely really accepted now, where people are seeing the value in it from a different perspective. Yeah, yes, exactly. Because it's a push, it's a pusher, you know, whereas therapy, as valuable as that is, it can be more passive, depending on your therapist. It can be more passive, whereas coaching is very accountable. It's very action-based. It's very like, hey, let's go. You got accountable. You didn't do your homework. I'm going to call you out on it, right? Yes, so you've got a little bit more of that, which I think we all need that. But I appreciate you saying that. And I do feel like it's a superpower, but that superpower gets passed on to you. That's the beautiful part about it too, is that I feel like I teach you superpower skills. And then you go out and you use your own superpowers now to be able to have that ability to be vulnerable, to have strong emotional intelligence, to be able to connect and understand people on a different level. It's essential to success in any area of our life, really.
So some of the things I'm vulnerable about are, for example, the fact that I am, English is my second language. So a lot of times I struggle with coming up with words, or I may say something and people are like, what'd you say? So they don't understand. Even Google doesn't understand me sometimes. But I heard this from another teacher of mine, that those vulnerabilities are sometimes your superpowers.
Yes.
What you think as a fault is so unique to you that makes you special. And that's sometimes that just connects me to people right away, because I can make a joke of it and say, oh, that's my ESL kicking in, or something like that. And it just it just makes people feel easy. Or another thing that I felt really vulnerable about, and this was a recent experience. I went to an ultrasound appointment, and that's one of the most vulnerable positions a person can be in, those stupid paper gowns.
Yes.
That cover absolutely nothing, and you're just lying there, just honestly not knowing what is happening.
Yes.
And so this was a feminine process. So the woman,
one of those.
Yeah, one of those. So the woman is getting this apparatus ready, and she's explaining to me at the same time to make me feel at ease.
Yeah.
And she says, so it's clean, but I'm going to put a condom over it so that it's extra protective. And I just thought I was gonna die, because I was like, oh my God, I feel so tense. And all I could do was make a joke and say, well, you could play some romantic music, And I just felt this release, in her face. It was so funny.
It's so true. It's so true. But that's the power. That's the power.
Yeah, absolutely. So making light of some situations, when you are putting yourself out there, go ahead.
And your weaknesses, right? Being able to laugh about some of our weaknesses. We all have them. So we can sit here and pretend all day long. We want to work on them. It's not like saying, I'm just like that, because of course we're always trying to work on our weaknesses and build our strengths, but we have to be able to laugh about them and own them and be okay with them. You know what I mean? And I think that the more we try to hide them and the more we try to protect them, the bigger they get. It's like the demons in the closet or the monsters under the bed, we're trying to keep them hidden, and they just get more power from that. We're feeding the monster. Whereas if we just kind of bring the monsters out and say, let's have a look at them. Let's look at them. My kids used to do this to me when they were little. Where we live, we have these wolf spiders, and they can get quite big, like palm size, furry black wolf spiders. And I'm not a good spider girl. I don't like spiders. So, but when the boys were small, they would catch them in these little terrariums outside, and they would pressure me like, Mom, come look at it. You'll get over your fear. Just come look at it. And they make me sit in the chair and to just stare at it to see if it would overcome my fear. Right. I still don't like them, but it was being like bringing it out, and they even believed as kids, right? If you look at it, you'll kill your fear, right? So it's true. It's like owning and seeing things for what they are, owning them, putting them out there squashes all the fear there is around them. You know that when we're honest, and most of the time we create a lot of stories in our head about what people are going to think about certain things. And they're always way worse than what the actual result is.
I know. Yes. Yeah, what is up with that?
Yeah, well, it's the catastrophizing that our brain does, right? It's not safe. It's this big scary thing. And we create this whole story around it. If we don't have answers, this is the thing about our brain. If we don't know something and we don't have the answers, our brain will come up with a solution. It will come up with a reason, right? It'll just make something up. And so depending on your conditioning and how fear-driven you are, how certainty-driven you are, how insecure you are, that will determine where the story kind of goes and to what level it goes. But for the most part, once we just kind of throw it out there and own it all, it's done. It squashes it completely.
Oh my God, the stories we tell ourselves, Carlayne.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They can go on and on and on.
It's the narrator in our head.
Yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have to, because it happens, right?
Yeah.
It happens. You know, as much as I'd like to say I want to stop these forever, it does happen, and I can catch myself and just say, stop.
Yes.
Like, stop. You have absolutely nothing, no facts
Yes.
to go by for this story.
Yeah. Every human being has negative thoughts. I mean, it's just a part of being human. We do have negative thoughts, but that's the key. Exactly what you just said is being able to squash it and take control. We have to be in control of our internal conversation. If we're not in control of what's going on up here, then I'm guaranteed, like, it's not going to be pretty. Things are going to hit the fan because, again, our brain will make up stories that are going to be way worse, and we're going to live in a space. It just conditions the fear. But when you take control of it and say, no proof for that, it's like myth busting. I'm not listening to you. I am the voice right now. I'm in charge, brain. Thank you very much. I'm in charge.
Yes.
So we kind of shut it down, but we have to learn that through the strategies that you learned on how to take control of that conversation, because sometimes people are in a place where they can't just talk themselves out of it right away. You know, there's a lot of deep-seated belief.
Yes.
Where they really need to kind of go through all of that in order to get the skill set to be able to shut down those voices.
So it makes it so important to take notice. Like, we don't give too much attention to our mental health, and I think that we should, because it's super important to take notice, to give it a second and really think about, how am I feeling? Like, what am I telling myself on a regular basis? What am I feeling? What are these emotions? Like, and really pay attention to that and talk to someone, right?
Yes,
Don't
absolutely.
keep it to yourself, because that can be the start of something really serious. That's deeper than just the everyday stress that we go through, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why we're in a mental health crisis, right? I mean, there's so many people who are really struggling with this. And I think that often what happens is vulnerability, the lack of vulnerability isolates us. It doesn't help people to see that there are so many of us. If people could understand that there's always someone else who's feeling like you, then it would change everything for them. But most people, when they're in a bad place, think that they're the only one. You don't understand. But guaranteed, people understand. It's like teenagers, going through high school, and they're really struggling with that unworthiness and trying to fit in and feeling like, oh my gosh, they're looking at me wrong, and walking down the hall and being very insecure. Most teenagers feel that way. So probably the majority of them do, even if it doesn't show, and there's going to be different levels of it. But they don't understand that everyone's feeling that way. They isolate themselves and feel like, oh, I'm struggling. I'm the only one in the world who has this, but everybody has it. If we could just be more open and more vulnerable with each other with all of the mental health stuff and our feelings and our thoughts. And that's why I have a big belief that emotional intelligence should be taught in schools from a very early age and continued. Yeah, I think it needs to be actually an essential program that's all through school, like math and English. Honestly, it's half of everything that we do. It's a part of everything that we do. Our emotional awareness, our emotional world determines all of the outcomes that we get in our life. So we can only squash it down for so long. Most people can just squash it down and tuck it down, but it's usually around 40s that people start, like, oh, they call that the midlife crisis, but it's really
or spiritual awakening.
Yeah, spiritual awakening. That's right. I like that one better. But it's really because people haven't been living in alignment with themselves for so long. You can only handle that for so long, right? Or not understanding their emotions. So Yeah, I think it's really essential, but it's essential for people to feel that there's a belonging in being able to own our struggles, that we all struggle, and that
Mm-hmm.
it's so okay to struggle, and it's okay to have a bad day, and it's okay to be angry, and it's okay to be sad, and all of our feelings and our emotions are valid. um, we want to improve on kind of the meaning that we're giving to a lot of them, probably because they're holding us back from getting outcomes that we want to get in our life. But it's all okay, it's all normal, right? We all feel this way. And that's the other thing. It's like about, that self-compassion piece. And I've said this to you before, like self-compassion says, of course. We have to look at where we've come from. We have to look at the way we've been programmed and be able to say, of course. Of course I feel that way. Of course I struggle with vulnerability, right? Of course I've struggled with that. My mom used to tell me, you're so emotional, stop being so emotional, or you're to be seen and not heard, or whatever the things were that programmed us that way. It's like, yeah, of course. So that's fine. We can have self-compassion, but still say, but I do want to work on it because it's important to
That's
me.
so good. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So instead of saying I shouldn't be this way, I shouldn't feel this way, right?
Yeah.
Just saying, of course, I feel this way.
Of course.
It's understandable, and if you
course.
don't like it, you can change it. You can
That's
start
right.
there.
That's right.
Because vulnerability is not weakness.
No,
Vulnerability is courage.
it is. It's
It
strength.
takes courage, strength, to show up as yourself.
Yes, absolutely it does. And to be brave, to put yourself out there, to make those connections first, just to have the hard conversations, to say what you feel, to let people see you in maybe your not best state, to start a new business opportunity and risk
Mm-hmm.
judgment or what people might think. There's so many things. To go to the gym when you're 100 pounds overweight, feeling like everyone's going to be looking at you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Starting anything, that's all vulnerability. That's all me saying, I know that I matter and I know that I deserve something more. And I'm willing to be putting myself out there with the fear that someone might be judging me for this. And, maybe they are, because it's a judgmental world. But you know what? The world's going to judge you regardless of what you do. Like, it doesn't matter who you are.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to judge you. So you might as well do the shit that lights your soul on fire.
Yeah. like sing at a karaoke bar.
That's right. Sing it out, sister. Sing it out. And if you fall down, there's this thing. It's always like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? Well, I might fall down the stairs as I'm, going on stage. All right. Well, then will that matter 5 years from now? No.
Mm-mm.
It won't matter. None of it matters. Yeah.
Honestly. Oh my gosh. Yes, that's so good.
Yeah.
So again, people who are listening to this, talk to this woman. Seriously. Because you have no idea the things you're going to gain. And what's the worst that's going to happen? 1 hour of talking to this angel might just change your life, as it has mine. So do
Thanks,
it.
Stella. Mwah, mwah.
So true. I want to thank you again for giving me your time. This is so good. Like I love our talks.
I know.
So I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful to have you in my life. You've taught me so much, and you still do. And any last words?
Well, thank you for that, first of all. And I'm so grateful to have you in my life as well, my dear. Every single one of my clients actually changes my life too, because you add a different layer of perspective for me. You add a different layer of compassion for me. And all of it is a gift. I honestly can say that I feel like I'm the luckiest girl in the world that I get to do what I get to do and connect with people so vulnerably every single day.
Yes.
People share all their stuff with me, right? They
Yeah.
share everything with me. And and lay it on the table. And so there's nothing more vulnerable than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I know what it feels like to live that authentic, raw connection with people. So I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say to everyone that, your brain's lying to you. If it's telling you that vulnerability is dangerous and that it's fear, it's actually power. It's strength, it's courage, it's all of those things. So, to start exploring where in your life that you feel maybe there's some areas that you could work on that vulnerability and how that might better those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Della.
so much. Can't wait to have you back on here very soon.
Yay!
And
I love chatting with you. It's always
I,
fun, my dear.
I love chatting with
I
you
know.
too. If anyone has any questions, you can post them on this post, and we'll have Carlayne's information also on there. Reach out to her and see how she can change your life as she has mine. And with that, this is Della's voice, hoping to spark your soul. Till next time.